Today, I'll be reading to you from the seventh book in the Left Behind series. This book is called The Indwelling, and today I'll be reading to you chapter 18, and I'll begin to read now. David was struck by the fact that Leon, for all his sanctimony, seemed genuinely moved. No doubt he revered Carpathia and was more than the typical sycophant. Clearly, he was jockeying for position as new supreme potent. But here also was a man who grieved the loss of his friend and mentor and champion. And while he did not have the polish, the panache, the charisma of his predecessor, Leon knew how to milk the moment. If you'll all be seated, please, he began, his voice so thick with emotion that thousands seemed to involuntarily cover their mouths to contain their own crying. David, his own uniform heavy with sweat, lifted one foot to cross his legs and felt the stickiness on the ground. The heat had made his rubber soles tacky. Fortunato made a show of collecting himself and smoothing his notes with meaty hands. Nikolai, Jetty, Carpathia, he began, in just about a whisper. Excuse me. He wiped a hand across his mouth. I can do this. I will do this with your patience. Nikolai Carpathia was born 36 years ago, the only child of two only children in a tiny hospital in the town of Roman, Romania, in the eastern foothills of the Moldavian Carpathian Mountains, a little more than 200 kilometers north and slightly east of Bucharest. Fortunato paused again to clear his throat. The young Nikolai was a precocious and extremely bright child with avid interest in athletics and academics, primarily languages, history, and science. Before the age of 12, he won his first election as president of the Young Humanists. He was a stellar high school student, a celebrated debater and speaker, and valedictorian, repeating that honor at university. Mr. Carpathia excelled as an entrepreneur and began public service early, becoming a member of Romania's lower parliament before age 25. His devotion to pacifism brought both criticism and praise and became the hallmark of his life's work. Mr. Carpathia once told me that he believed the zenith of his career, even after being swept in as president of Romania as a young man at the behest of his predecessor, was his invitation to address the United Nations some 3.5 years ago. Honored beyond expression, the young head of state worked hard on his presentation, outlining the history of the UN, employing every one of his languages, and memorizing his speech in its entirety. Little did he know that just prior to his appearance at the General Assembly, the earth would suffer its greatest calamity, the tragedy we all know now as the Day of the Vanishings. Stripped of our children and babies, Fortunato paused again, and countless friends and relatives and neighbors, the world family, grieved as one. We were not aware then of the truth that only a man such as Nikolai Carpathia could bring to light, that the phenomenon that brought such bereavement was preventable, one rooted in our war technology. All we knew when the Romanian president stepped to the podium at the United Nations was that we were terrified to the point of immobility. Despairing of the future, regretting the past, we prayed in our own ways to our own gods for someone to take us by the hand and lead us through the minefields of our own making and into the blessedness of hope. How could we have known that our prayers would be answered by one who would prove his own divinity over and over as he humbly, selfishly served, giving of himself even to the point of death to show us the way to healing? The crowd could not contain itself and burst into applause. Several times Leon held up a hand, but they would not be silenced. Applause turning to cheer, and then they rose, sector by sector, until again everyone was standing, clapping, cheering, mourning their slain leader. David was nauseated. Give me the rough layout of the safe house, Albie said. Where it stands, what's around it, any other buildings, roads in and out. I don't know if you have anything similar in your country, Albie, Rayford said, but picture a subdivision, a housing development, maybe 30 years old that has been tossed into a blender. The roads were ripped up and twisted out of the ground, and so many of the homes and businesses in that area were demolished that after rescue efforts, the area was abandoned. Best we can determine, no one lives within 3 miles of the place. We took over half of a badly damaged duplex, two homes in one. We expanded a cellar to make an underground hiding place, which we didn't need, at least that we knew of until now. We rigged our own makeshift well and solar power plant and took various routes to the place that made it look as if we could have been headed anywhere. What else is on the property? About 50 paces from the back door is a barn like garage that originally served both halves of the duplex. We hid our vehicles in there. We are now down to one, and this is it. So the garage is empty. And the other half of the residence? Empty. Other dwellings in the area? Pretty much piles of rubble that have been hauled away. What hides you? Besides that, no one comes to the area except by mistake. There are mature trees and lots of open fields beyond our place. And the usual route from the airstrip takes you into the area from what direction? We use various routes to keep from attracting attention. Almost always travel by night, but usually find ourselves coming in from the south. Miss Leah, Albie said, if you find an inconspicuous place to stop, please do. Away from paved roads already, Leah pulled into a shallow gully between two small groves of trees. Thank you. Now, Captain Steele, your best guess of how the GC would approach the house if they wanted to surprise. Rayford searched for a scrap of paper and drew an aerial view of the place. They'd come through the trees at the north, he said. Buck, what do you think? Buck studied the schematic, then showed it to Chloe and Leah. They all nodded. All right, Leah, Albie said. Come in from the south as usual, as far away from the safe house as you can. Drive without lights. Stop about half a kilometer away. Ideally, where you could see the safe house, but someone there would not likely see you. Half a kilometer, Leah said. About 3/10 of a mile, Chloe said. There's a little rise about that far away, isn't there, Dad? Just past where we turned to head towards the plains. Yeah, and we noticed it because the rest of the whole area is so flat. Let's get there quickly, Albie said. Lights off as soon as you're confident. As Fortunato held forth, alternately bringing the masses to their feet and making them weep, David surreptitiously pulled his binoculars from a side pocket. Leaning forward, elbows on knees, he trained the glasses on the great crowds seated past the courtyard. He found the play card that read Sector 53 and carefully panned, looking for Annie. At first he didn't see her, but then, intrigued to see a pair of binoculars pointed his direction, despite hands and glasses covered her face, he could tell it was Annie. They stared at each other through the lenses. Then tentatively waved with just fingers. David, with his hand still on the binoculars, held up one finger, then four, then three. She mirrored the message, their code for the number of letters in each word, I love you. I shall have some closing remarks as well, Leon said, winding down, but I want to give you representatives from every global region the opportunity to express their thoughts before intermittent in the palace mausoleum. We've requested these be kept brief due to the weather, but we also want these potentates to speak from their heart. First, from the United Russian States, Dr. Victor. Captain Steele, Albie said. Call Tyson and tell him who I am so I may speak to him without his suspicion. Tyson answered on the first tone. Tyson, it's me. We're within a half mile of you. Are you okay? So far, Kenny is asleep. I'm packed and ready to go and feeling claustrophobic. I want out of this place. Tyson, I'm giving the phone to my dear friend and new believer, Albie. You've heard me mention him before. Yes, and he is the one of us now. Thanks to your teaching, which we can discuss later, he is using the name Marcus Elbaz and posing as a global community peacekeeping deputy commander. Tyson sat on the steps in the darkness, phone to his ear, the two tied together, packed pillowcases at his feet. All he had to do was grab them in one hand and the baby in the other, and he could be up through the freezer and out the door in seconds. But for now, he had no transportation and no idea where the GC was waiting to ambush him. He had heard so much about Rayford's black market friend, he could hardly believe he was about to speak with him. Dr. Ben Judah, this is Tyson. Yes, Albie? Sir, I want to get right to business, but I must tell you I owe you my soul. Thank you, sir. It appears I may soon owe you my life. Let's hope so. Tell me, have you heard anything that might tell you the GC are nearby? To tell you the truth, I nearly phoned Rayford about half an hour ago. It may have been paranoia, but I heard vehicles. Close? Not very, but they were north of here. What frightened me was that they were intermittent, meaning starting, stopping, moving. I didn't know what to make of it. You don't usually hear any cars or trucks? Right. And you've heard nothing since about 30 minutes ago? About that. All right, listen carefully. Do you recognize the sound of the Land Rover? I mean, could you confidently distinguish it from, say, a GC Jeep? I believe I could. Would you hear it plainly if it came between the house and the garage? Certainly. And you can hear garage sounds, doors opening and closing? Yes, but these aren't typical American garage doors. They are manual and they swing like barn doors. All right, thank you. If in the next 15 minutes you hear what sounds like the Land Rover, it will be us. Any other noises or sounds, please let us know immediately. Each potentate was greeted by music from his region and wild demonstrations from his people. Some had their people largely together, others saw them spread throughout the crowd. Most of the speakers echoed the sentiments of the potentate of the United Russian States, who listed Carpathia among not only the greatest heads of the state and military leaders the world had ever known, but also among the most revered religious leaders and even deities of various faiths and sects. The Asian leader, the second potentate to speak, said, I know I speak for every citizen of my great region. When I say that my reverence for His Excellency, the Supreme Potentate, has only increased in his death. I worshiped his leadership, his vision, his policies, and now I worship the man himself. May his fame and legend and glory only grow, now that he is again in heaven from whence he came. The Potentate of the United Indian States intoned that while we once believed that a good man comes back at a higher level, and thus that a bright star like Nikolai Carpathia would be guaranteed the role of a Brahmin, he himself taught us, with his brilliant vision for a one world faith, that even such traditional religious views have lost their currency. Even those who have come to believe that when you are dead, and there is nothing more, have to admit, and I say this directly to Nikolai Carpathia, you will live for as long as we live, for you will always be alive in our hearts and in our memories. Though the throng responded enthusiastically, David was intrigued that Fortunato seemed to feel the need to clarify, or at least modify, the effect of that speech. Before introducing the potentate from the United African States, Enoch Litwala, Fortunato took the floor briefly. Thank you for those sentiments, Potentate Ganawa. I appreciate the reference to the One World Church, which shall reappear in New Babylon as an even better expression of a pure united religion. Ironic, isn't it, that of the two sects most resistant to the ideas of a unified faith, one saw our great leader fall in its own homeland, and the other was responsible for his assassination. I do not blame the Israelis, as they are a valued part of the United Carpathian States, They cannot be held responsible for the climate endangered, engendered by their stubborn Orthodox Jews, most of whom have resisted to this day the inclusive invitation of the one world faith. And then the Judites, expressing such exclusivistic, closed minded doctrines as there being but a single path to God. Should we be surprised that the very assassin of our beloved Potent is a leading member of that cult? With that pronouncement and the attendant applause, the great black statue left began to Leon's left began to smoke profusely, the wisp of black vapor becoming billowing clouds. Leon seemed to take this in stride, quipping, "Even Nicola the Great has to agree with that." But seriously, before our African potentate comes, let me reiterate, any cult, sect, religion, or individual who professes a single avenue to God or heaven or bliss in the afterlife is the greatest danger to the global community. Such a view engenders diversiveness, hatred, bigotry, condensation, and pride. I say to you with the confidence of one who sat in the presence of greatness every day for the last several years, there are many ways to ensure eternal bliss. If anything is eternal, it is not by walling yourself and your comrades off a corner claiming you have the inside track to God. It is by being a good and kind human being and helping others. Nikolai Carpathia would have been the last person in the world to espouse a one way religion, and look how he is revered. We will worship him in his memory for as long as we are alive. And that, my friends, will keep him and his ideals alive. David wondered if the crowd would ever get as sick of itself as he was of the predictable clapping and cheering. Enoch Litwala cast a pall on the proceedings when his inappropriately brief and lukewarm tribute fell flat. All he said was, "As potentate of the great United African States, it falls to me to express the sentiments of my people. Please accept our sincere condolences to the leadership of the global community and to those of you who love the deceased. The United African States opposes violence and deplores the senseless act by a misguided individual ignorantly believing what has been spoon fed him and millions of others who refuse to think for themselves." With that, Litwala said, catching even Leon off guard. Two other tributes were lukewarm, which David thought made it obvious who were the loyal and the disloyal among the potentates. Albie leaned forward and whispered to Rayford, "Come with me, Leah. Watch for my signal. If I wave, proceed slowly, lights off. If I call again, stand by for instructions, but be prepared to come fast, lights on, and be sure to stop short of Rayford and me." "I'm coming with you," Chloe said. "Our baby is in there." "Just as well," Albie said without hesitation. "Three is better anyway." They crept from the rover toward the safe house. Rayford saw Chloe's look in the low light, one of fierce determination that was more than just that of a protective mother. If they were going to engage the enemy, she plainly wanted in on it. Rayford was aware of the cool air, the sound of his steps in the sparse underbrush, and his own breathing. He felt great melancholy about the safe house as they approached it. It had become his base, his home. Despite all the places he had been, it had housed his family, his friends, his mentor, and he knew if he had the opportunity to step inside it once again, it would likely be for the last time. When the last potentate had spoken, and the crowd grew restless, from all over the courtyard and beyond, people stood in a mass, ready to once again begin the processional past the bear. But Fortunato was not finished. "If you'll bear with me a few more minutes," he said, "I have additional remarks I believe you will find inspirational. It should be clear to even the most casual observer that this is more than a funeral for a great leader, that the man who lies before you transcends human existence. Yes, yes, you may applaud. Who could argue such sentiments? I am pleased to report that the image you see to my left, Your right, though larger than life, is an exact replica of Nikolai Carpathia, worthy of your reverence. Yeah, worthy of your worship. Should you feel inclined to bow to the image after paying your respects, feel free. Bow, pray, sing, gesture, do whatever you wish to express your heart, and believe. Believe, people, that Nikolai Carpathia is indeed here in spirit and accepts your praise and worship. Many of you know that this so-called man, who, whom I know to be divine, personally raised me from the dead. And now, as your new leader in the absence of one we all wish were still here, allow me to be forthright. I am no director, but let me ask the main television camera to move in on my face. Those close enough can look into my eyes. Those remote may look into my eyes on the screen. David knew what happened to people who allowed themselves to be caught in Fortunato's gaze. He looked left, past the Wongs, who appeared enraptured, reached to touch Chang and motioned with his head to Ming. When they looked at him, he shook his head imperceptibly and was grateful they both seemed to understand. They averted their gaze from Fortunato's. Today, Fortunato intoned, Today, Fortunato intoned, I am instituting a new improved global faith that shall have as its object of worship this image, which represents the very spirit of Nikolai Carpathia. Listen carefully, my people. When I said a moment ago that you may worship this image and Nikolai himself if you felt so inclined, I was merely being polite. Silence, please. With global citizenship comes responsibility, and that responsibility entails subordination to those in authority over you. There was such deadly silence that David doubted if anyone so much as moved. As your new ruler, it is only fair of me to tell you that there is no option as it pertains to worshiping the image and spirit of Nikolai Carpathia. He is not only part of our new religion, but he is also its centerpiece. Indeed, he has become and forever shall be our religion. Now, before you break your reverie and bow before the image, let me impress upon your mind the consequences of disobeying such an edict. Suddenly, from the statue itself, with its great expanses of black smoke, now nearly blotting out the sun, came a thundering pronouncement. I am the Lord your God, who sits high above the heavens. People, including Guy Blood and his assistants, shrieked and fell prostrate, peeking at the image. I am the God above all other gods. There is none like me. Worship or beware. Fortunato suddenly spoke softly, fatherly. Fear not, he said. Lift your eyes to the heavens. The massive dark clouds dissipated, and the image appeared serene once more. Nikolai Carpathia loves you and has only your best in mind. Charged with the responsibility of ensuring compliance with the worship of your God, I have also been imbued with power. Please stand. The masses stood as one, appearing terrified, eyes glued to Leon or to his image on the screens. He gestured grandly behind him, past the glass coffin, and the guards past the 10 potentates, 3 of whom glared stonily. Let us assume that there may be those who choose, for one reason or another, to refuse to worship Carpathia. Perhaps they are independent spirits. Perhaps they are rebellious Jews. Perhaps they are secret Judites who still believe their man is the only way to God. Regardless of their justification, they shall surely die. The crowd recoiled, and many gasped. Marvel not that I say unto you that some shall surely die. If Carpathia is not God, and I am not his chosen one, then I shall be proved wrong. If Carpathia is not the only way and the only life, then what I say is not the only truth, and none shall fear. It is also only fear that I offer proof of my role. In addition to what you have already seen and heard from Nikolai Carpathia's own image, I call on the power of my most high God to prove that he rules from heaven by burning to death with his pure, extenuating fire those who would oppose him, those who would deny his deity, those who would subvert and plot and scheme to take my rightful place as his spokesman. He paused dramatically. Then I pray he does this even as I speak. Leon turned to face the 10 potentates and pointed at the 3 who opposed him. Great beams of fire burst from the cloudless skies and incinerated the 3 where they sat. The other 7 leaped from their seats to avoid the heat and flames, and even the guards backpedaled. The crowd shrieked and wailed, but no one moved, no one ran. Every soul seemed paralyzed with fear, and the fire that left the 3 smoldering in tiny piles of ash disappeared as quickly as it had come. Fortunato spoke again. Faithful patriots of the global community from the 3 regions formerly led by men of lying tongues, take heart. Their replacements have already been selected in meetings I have enjoyed with the spirit of Nicolae Carpathia himself. The global community shall prevail. We shall reach our goal of utopian living, harmony, love, and tolerance. Tolerance of all those who refuse to worship the image of the man we esteem and glorify today. It was clear Fortunato expected applause, but the gathered were so stunned, so filled with terror, that they merely stared. You may express yourselves, Leon said with a smile. Still no one moved. His eyes narrowed. You may express your agreement, he said, and tentative clapping began. You need not fear your Lord God, he said, as the applause continued. What you have witnessed here shall never befall you if you love Nicolae with the love that brought you here to honor his memory. Now, before the intermittent, once everyone has had a chance to pay last respects, I invite you to come and worship. Come and worship. Worship your God, your dead yet living King. Rayford followed Albie's signal and fanned left while Chloe was sent right. The 3, about 30 paces apart, advanced upon the safe house from 200 yards away. They watched for signs of GC. Had they been there? Were they yet there? Were they coming? Suddenly, Albie dropped into the grass and signaled Rayford and Chloe to do the same. He had taken a call, then he signaled them to join him. Tyson hears the engine noises again, he whispered, coming from the north, only steady this time, as if advancing. He spoke as he dialed Leah. We're going to beat them to the safe house on foot, so be ready to run, and if we encounter GC, stay a step or 2 behind me. Leah, give us about 90 seconds, then come fast with lights on. Just be careful not to overtake us. When we stop, you stop as close to the garage as you can. Stay in the vehicle with the lights on, and don't worry if you see GC Jeeps coming the other way. Albie slapped the phone shut, upholstered his sidearm, bounced to his feet, and said, let's go. As Rayford lopped along in the darkness, wondering how many minutes he might have left on Earth, he was impressed that Chloe had no trouble keeping pace. He also wondered at the strange difference in Albie. He'd always been resourceful, but was there something else about him now, besides his new profession of faith? Rayford wondered, why had he not assured himself of the integrity of Albie's mark? Could he be sure of anything he saw under the dim interior light of the rover? A wounded old man between him and Albie. And that's the end of chapter 18. Next, I'll be reading chapter 19. I thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful day.